I'd like to call the March 9th, 2021 Public Works Board to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Picard?
Here.
Mr. Polachek?
Here.
Mr. Reich?
Here.
Mr. Rupplinger?
Here.
And Mr. Temperley previously informed staff that he'd be unavailable for this evening's meeting.
All right. Next is correction and or approval of the minutes of January 12th, 2021. Anybody who would like to make any corrections or a motion to approve?
So move.
I second.
Okay, motion and second to approve the minutes. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Can I just get some clarification who made the original motion? I know I saw Mr. Rupplinger was the second. Thank you.
Questions and public comment? I don't believe there is any. So we'll move on to item 5, Director of Public Works report.
All right, thank you, Mark. For Lisa and Greg, what we do at every meeting is a brief director's report. And basically it's just a quick walkthrough of some of the issues that are coming up or things that council, or excuse me, board members have asked to get a little update on. So I'll give this report, and then you guys always have the option to send me a note or something, let me know if there's something you need an update on. And as we go through this, of course, then ask any questions that you want. Otherwise, we make this kind of short and quick, but certainly we'll talk about anything on this list that anybody wants to talk about. I'm always told that I can't deviate from the agenda, so we try to make this list as complete as possible. So the first item on it is the 2021 LSL replacement program. And as we've talked about in the past, we have gotten some more funding from the DNR to continue helping residents replace their portion of the lead service lines. And I'll just stop here. If I use acronyms or jargon you don't understand, please let me know, because I tend to do that. But we did this program, or had a first round of funding that actually ended in 2019, 2020, and had good success with it. So this is kind of a second round of funding from the DNR. And we have been notified that we will be receiving some grant money. The DNR has not identified how much per community yet. And I will tell you here that we applied initially for 35, or enough funds to replace about 35 lead service lines. Since then, we've taken a look and are considering increasing that number. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future if and when we get to the point where we want to make a jump in that number. But real quick, what we looked at is what it would take to get through all of the LSLs, all the remaining road service lines in Lake Mills in the next 3 years, which is kind of the estimate for the length of time that this particular amount of funding will last for. And we identified somewhere between 70 and 75 per year that we would have to do. Again, we applied and have basically been awarded enough for 35. So we're looking at that internally. There's a lot of issues to look at there. Cost of the utility, because the rule is that every time a resident replaces their lead service line, the city has to make sure that we don't have lead and that sort of thing. So there are some dollars involved in this. But we'll kind of see how this plays out. Second thing I'll let you know is that what we do in Lake Mills is, and is anybody else getting some background noise there? Yeah. Okay, I just want to make sure everybody's okay.
Yeah, Greg Polachek, could you mute your mic while you're not speaking? Because we're getting some feedback from your mic.
Sorry.
Yep, no problem.
Thought I muted it.
All right, thanks. Thank you.
I'll mute it.
The other thing, what we do in Lake Mills is we identify or put together a certified or a contractors list that then we give to the residents, and they can join, or excuse me, contact and work with whatever contractor they want to. Last year, or in the last round of funding, S&S Plumbing from Lake Mills and then Pertsborn from Madison were the two contractors that completed the request for qualifications. This year so far we have one more, and that's Mid-City Excavating and Plumbing out of Butler, Wisconsin. And so we will be sending letters out then again to all the folks that we've identified to change their LSLs, that those three contractors are qualified and they can contact them. And that is really the quick update on the LSL program. Yes, Lisa.
Just a quick question. My husband and I took advantage of that a couple of years ago, and if I remember right, it was 75-25 cost share. Is that the same moving forward with the next round of funding?
You are correct. And,
Okay.
and the only other caveat to that is that's a maximum of $3,750.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions on that one? All right. The next one then on the list is the utility moratorium, disconnect moratorium. And this is something that has actually been going on since last March, when the PSC would not allow utilities to disconnect. And
Paul,
yeah, go ahead.
we were already in the moratorium from November, and then
Yeah, you're correct. And I'm gonna kind of highlight that, Steve, but you're absolutely correct. So really, for us, there's been a disconnect moratorium since November of 2019. And we are now moving into what would be kind of toward the end of the moratorium, which is typically April 15th. The Public Service Commission will be meeting on March 18th to decide how they want to proceed. And quite honestly, based on what I'm reading and talking to some other managers, it's still a bit of a roll of the dice if they're going to open it up this April. We wouldn't be surprised if they wait a little more into spring, maybe summer, to open this up, but we will find out more on the 18th. This has not been too bad for the utility, if you will, as far as cash flow and the arrearages and all this sort of thing. So I'm going to give you some numbers as to where we're at here, but I'm going to throw a lot of caveats out here. Number one, I'm going to give you a total that people are in arrears, and it's only going to be residential customers. And as I said, some of these date back to November of 2019. Some of these may have only been a couple of months ago. But I want to give you a little snapshot and then talk a little bit about what we're doing and are going to do in this regard. So we first took a look at this, I think it was at John's request, to see where we were at in January. And at that time, we had about $100,000, $101,000 in arrearages. You know, that's money that people owed us, and again, only residential. And that was about 277 customers. And just for reference, we have about 3,800 customers. And that amount, by the way, also includes water. So that's the total utility bill. That's water, electric, sewer, but I don't think it includes the garbage fees. But that's total utility arrearages. In January, the lowest back bill we had was about $52, and the highest one was just about $1,600. Excuse me. So we took a look at that this month, and we're now at about 139,000 in total residential arrearages. We have about 357 customers now that are behind. That is probably the most concerning number of the bunch, is that we've jumped up to about 80 customers who are behind at some level. This one's kind of weird, but the low right now that is owed is $26. So I'm going to guess that just happened recently. But again, the other concerning thing then is that the high is about $2,500 for one customer. Now, in the overall scheme of things, this is actually quite close to where we typically are this time of the year. Usually in late March, early April, as we're getting ready to wrap up the moratorium, we're somewhere in the $160,000 to $170,000 total arrearages, and somewhere around 300 people. So what I'm saying here is a couple of things. Number one is, yep, the moratorium, this length of moratorium has an effect. And we're seeing a lot of customers that are having some issues getting their utility bills paid. I will tell you there are a few commercial customers that are on this list, but we're working very closely with them, and that will be taken care of. The other part of this is that in the overall scheme of things, this isn't bad. And people have been paying. And the other part of it is that we have been, aggressive isn't a word, but we've been very vigilant about working with people and making sure that they pay something on the utility bill every month. And absolutely giving them credit for that. Now, the Public Service Commission is pushing really hard deferred payment agreements, or DPAs. And basically what these are working with customers to say, all right, you owe X amount, let's divide that by 12, we'll add that to your monthly bill and try to make this a little more affordable for everybody. And we're starting to put more and more of those in place, and they're working pretty good. There's two other processes we have that we're using them. They're a little tougher, if you will, but we're using them. One is a program called TRIP, which stands for Tax Return Intercept Program. And basically what this does is allow us to contact the Department of Revenue. And as a government agency, we are eligible to do this. And that is, if a customer has a tax return coming, we can get a portion of that for paying their arrearages. So I'm told we have not used that a lot, but it is a tool that we may be able to use if we can't get a deferred payment agreement or some other kind of agreement in place. The other one that is more controversial, if you will, and a little more difficult is that for renters and apartment buildings, we can put arrearages for the renters on the landlord's tax bill. And we have done some of that. That one is tough, I say, because that really puts a lot of burden on the landlord. And I would not be surprised if at the end of this moratorium, as we get through the COVID stuff a little bit more, there's some changes made to the law that allows that to happen. I can see both sides. You know, I can see where the utility, we have to be able to maintain our cash flow, but I can also see where it's really difficult on landlords to have to deal with this. So, but we have used both of those, and those are helping to keep our arrear amounts manageable. So the last thing that I'll mention on this one is going forward, we are doing a lot of communication with the folks that are struggling or that are having some problems paying their bill. Again, we're trying to set up the deferred payment agreements. We're finding places for them to see if they can help get some funds, get some assistance, that sort of thing. And, you know, trying to be as helpful as we can with this, and at the same time, keep the utility whole. So this is a tough topic. This is a really tough topic, even in times when there's no COVID or something like that going on. But I want to kind of end this portion of the report saying that we're extremely pleased with the effort that people are making to pay their bills and to stay as current as they can. And it's working quite well. And we're not in a situation that some other utilities might be in this regard. I know I talked a long time on that one. Any questions there?
It sounds overly positive, so that's pretty good for considering the situation that we're in right now.
I agree. Thanks, Greg. And I will tell you that I'm accused often of being a little too positive about things, but and I can tell you, you know, the person that's behind $2,500, that's tough. That is really tough for somebody, and we're going to figure that out. But yeah, we're doing okay. John, did you have a question, or you just cambered on? Okay.
No, thanks. Very, very complete, Paul. I really appreciate it. Thanks much.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Next one is street de-icing. And gosh, I hope I didn't just jinx things by bringing up this topic, but you were hopefully through the season a little bit. Just a couple of things on this one. Excuse me. Number one, is that just recently we have linked up with an organization called SaltWise, which was really started in Dane County. And it's a group that works with municipalities to really help control and understand the amount of salt that's being used on the roads. And of course, with a gem like Rock Lake right here, we want to be very aware of how much salt we're using and making sure we're doing it right. So 2 things on this one. Number 1 is that we have been working on putting together a brine truck for a year or a little over now. And quite honestly, I'll be really straight up. We've met a little resistance from the street crew because they just weren't sure it would work. They'd heard horror stories about, sometimes when, the perfect storm hit and brining actually made things worse. But we now linked up with this organization so that we can get some good training, get some good information. And one of the things that's really key to brining is calibrating the amount of brine that's being put on the street. So we're going to work with SaltWise to make sure we know what we're doing and do it well. And our overall objective is to use less salt and protect the lake as much as we can. Doesn't mean, and I've mentioned this to other folks, that it doesn't mean that this is the do-all, end-all. We're still going to use salt, still needed for safety. Plowing the street is still the absolute best way of keeping ice off it and that sort of thing. So this is just a tool to help us do a little better. Now, second thing is, one question that comes up quite often is, are we using less salt? And quite honestly, that's a very difficult question to answer because each year is so different. When you look back at this last winter, you would have thought that we'd used a lot of salt, but we quite honestly didn't use that much. In fact, we're in a situation right now where we have to find a place to store salt that we aren't going to use that we had ordered for this season. And just so you understand, every April we have to, we buy into the state contract for salt purchases. And so every April we have to let them know about how many tons do we need for the coming season. And, Dwayne and Dave Ward and I sit down and try to figure this out. And sometimes we hit it and sometimes we miss it. And right now, it looks like we're going to be about 50 tons over. In other words, we're going to have 50 tons that we have to take, but we have no place to store. And so I've contacted a couple of communities around us, and everybody's in the same boat. In fact, they were going to call us and see if we had a place to store salt. It's just, it happens every once in a while. And that's a situation we're in right now. So in a really small way, I'm hoping we get maybe 1 or 2 more snow events so we can make room for our salt. And I'm just kidding. So don't do anything to influence if we get any more ice. And I will tell you in that connection that, again, Dwayne and Dave and I have been looking at it, and we've kind of been slowly lowering the amount of salt that we purchase every year. And I can't remember, Dwayne, I didn't get time to look, but I think at one time we were ordering somewhere close to 900 tons. And this year we were down to about 760. And we may even have some left over. And we're hoping that with brining, that we can reduce that even more and be just as effective in keeping our streets as clear as possible. So that's what we've got on the street de-icing. The next topic is actually several topics, and I did this for a couple reasons. One is to just give you a quick overview of what's going on, especially for some of the newer members or new reviewers to the Public Works Board meeting. But secondly, to let you know that it's going to be one busy summer from our standpoint. And we were talking about this morning in our department head meeting, and Steve said the new norm is that we're going to be very busy. And I got to thinking about that, Steve, and I think that's kind of the old norm too, to tell you the truth. But let me just kind of tick through some of these, and if you've got some questions, feel free to ask. Dwayne and Brandon, of course, are instrumental in all of these, so if you've got questions that I can't answer, they certainly should be able to. The first three, Westlake Street, Reed Street, and Jefferson Street, are kind of a package deal. Those are all streets that are going to be reconstructed this year. They have been bid. The bid has been awarded to A1 Construction. And I think right now we're really just waiting to have a pre-con meeting and establish just when they're going to start those projects. But it should be soon. And if the weather holds, the sooner the better. The only thing I'm going to mention in the regard to these three streets is the Westlake project, and that is that we're looking at possibly extending that project into Eastlake Street. And the reason for that, in the past few years, we've had 4, 5, half dozen water main breaks. He's got six water main breaks in a very short stretch of that street. And we're not 100% sure why, but they are all breaks where it totally cracks through the water main. So we're suspecting that the main is moving for some reason. You know, it's something's not proper there. And so now we're just trying to figure out how far we can go to replace that water main, which also will result in, you know, having to do a little bit of surface work. So we'll keep you informed on how we proceed with that one.
Paul?
Yep.
So that's like from Main Street going east to Madison then by the old Century? Is that the stretch where the problems are?
That's correct. That's correct. And if you drive down that street, Lisa, you'll see there are a lot of patches.
Yeah.
Those are all the water main breaks, and something's going on there. We're spending about $4,000 a foot to replace that right now, and that's a little expensive. So we're going to see if we can change that.
And I apologize, everybody else probably knows the answer to this, but since I'm new, is that the kind of thing that you can add on to an existing project? Because this one that the council just approved is pretty big scale. Is that something you can add on if there's dollars, or what's the mechanics of adding that on?
Sure. I'll leave some of the more detailed answer to Steve, but I believe there's a percentage that we can add on to the contract. We can't go over a certain percentage. And as far as the process goes, Steve, I don't know if we bring this back for approval by the board or anything, or simply keep them informed that we may be going farther. I think that's a bigger question here to me.
We've already had this conversation at the council level when we talked about the boat launch. And the fact that because we had saved so much money on the boat launch, we had set aside enough money that we would probably add it to this project. And yeah, so that's what we're doing. And that was part of the conversation, is how far do we go? And then the other part is 15% is what you're allowed to add on to a contract. The original contract is what, 2.2 or $2.3 million, 2.5. So 15% is way more than what we were looking at anyway. So we could add, I think we were looking at adding between $150,000 and $200,000 worth of additional work, depending on how far we go in each direction. There's a lot of debate that the best point to connect at Main Street is actually under the concrete, and do we want to cut the concrete? So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to work out and come back with. But will we probably bring that up with the council again as far as funding? Yeah, we probably, just to make sure that they know what we're looking at as far as this is what it's going to cost to stop this problem. And Paul's statement is when he's talking about that per foot replacement now, with as many water main breaks as we had, we've already spent $200,000 fixing water main breaks. And so it's just cheaper to go in and fix the water main and that problem, because otherwise it's just going to keep breaking on us, and we're going to spend another $200,000 before we fix it.
Yeah, just more Band-Aids, yeah.
Over what time frame have those water main breaks been?
I'm going to say 3 years, Dwayne. Does that sound about right? And I tell you what kind of put it over the top, Mark, is that we had 2 in the last 3 months. And it got to the point where since we were seeing the same thing over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we would have included originally, but the last 2 just made us say this can't go on.
And yet it was fine for many years before that.
Yeah, and that's a debate we were holding, Mark, is that water main was put in 1955, and it runs from well number 4 there on. Yeah, well number 4 on Franklin Street to the water tower that used to be on Tower Street, which is now gone. And to the east of Madison Street and to the west of Main Street, we haven't had any problems. So, a lot of times when we talk about water main breaks, and you probably remember the ones out here on Water Street in front of the municipal building, how many we had there, and then the ones we had on CP Avenue by that substation. Some of it was, the acidity of the soil. Some of it was the quality of the water main material. This one is probably more than likely related to the quality of the base material used under the street. And you were around in 2004 when we redid Lake Street. And if you remember correctly, the Albanizak did that job for us. And we got an extra because there was 8 inches of asphalt that they had to mill off. But then we got another extra because when they got down through the asphalt, they found that there was no gravel base. They just used asphalt. And then in this part of the street here, this one block, he said they had used every type of material known to man to fill that street. So, I've been around long enough to hear the stories about them duck hunting on the commons. And so I'm imagining it was a pretty wet spot, and eventually over the years they filled it in. But there were, the old Cream City brick and trees and every form of mud and muck was thrown into that street and used. So I'm imagining that soil condition is not conducive to supporting that water main. And that water main is getting old enough now where it can't take the stress and it's breaking. Now, where you don't have that type of soil problem to the east and to the west, it's not been a problem.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens, of course, is when we get a break, that starts to undermine the bedding. And you'll notice that these breaks are really quite close to each other. So it's not unlikely that one leak took away the bedding, caused another one, kind of a domino effect, because it really seems to be moving from west to east.
Paul, does there tend to be any sort of cross correlation to other buried utilities? Like when you have a water main break, do you see like the parallel sewer or any underground electric be affected by it?
Typically not, John. Now, that's a generalization, but typically we don't. It seems like, and Dwayne and Brandon, maybe you've got more experience in this, it seems like sewer may be affected by some of the undermining if it's close enough, but I don't know if that's a general correlation. And electric's a whole different ballgame. Some of that is going to be due to age and then soil condition, if it's too acidic, that sort of thing. But 90% of what we put in the ground now, we put in conduit. So I don't know, Brandon, Dwayne, do you see a direct correlation there?
I can give you some idea. First of all, the sanitary sewer is deeper. So instead of being at that 6.5 foot where the freeze thaw is impacting it more, it's down lower. The second thing is that sanitary sewer is at a grade. So generally what happens is the water from the water main break flows into where the sanitary sewer is because it's lower and it's got a material that attracts it, sand or gravel. And then that starts to run down that grade all the way down to maybe Rock Creek. But it starts flowing away when it hits the sanitary sewer. So sanitary sewers rarely have any impact from this type of activity unless they start to get really shallow. You'll notice it more in laterals to the buildings than you will in the deep sanitary sewers. Dwayne or Brandon, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, you were hitting the very topics I was thinking of as well, Steve.
Yeah, I think in this case, I don't think there's any interaction with other sewers. There certainly could be circumstances where, if a sanitary sewer below a water main wasn't installed well and, the bedding sunk and the water main cracked or something, or if you had electric facilities really close to a water main that could cause some sort of subsurface electric kind of cathodic erosion of the pipe material. But I don't think that's what's happening here.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just add, this is a little bit off topic, but I'll add that there is so much stuff going in the ground now, water, sewer, electric, cable, telephone. It's getting pretty crowded. And so what you're asking may indeed be something that begins to happen more often. there are certain areas where, like heading out to Mud Lake Road, everything had to fit in a very small area, and it's just, you know, it just seems like there's going to be again a domino effect. So, go ahead, Dwayne.
And if I may, one of the things we did talk about, especially with Bill from the treatment plant, is if this does move forward, and talking with Dave, we will intend on televising both the sanitary and the storm sewer in that area, just to make sure that some of these leaks have not affected those mains. If we are going to go and replace the water main, if there is some damage that has occurred, we'd like to take care of it at the same time. And later on in the discussion, when we get to maintenance, we'll probably talk about possible options that we're looking at as far as restoration of that street.
All right, moving on then. Number 4 is the Summer Ridge development. Now, some of these you may not be aware of because they're fairly new and they're still in the planning process. And I hope none of this is high security, or what am I thinking of? Can't be divulged, if you will.
Confidential.
So, confidential, thank you. So I'll be okay. Let me know if I should stop. But Summer Ridge development is one that's planned for the intersection of Brookstone Drive and County B. And it's basically, I think, an apartment condo complex. And so we're working with the developers there to get the infrastructure put together. And it sounds like if they can, they want to be in the ground yet this spring and possibly even have some buildings up by the end of the year. And so that will keep us busy. And I just want to mention here that, and maybe some of you realize this, some of you don't, as under the Department of Public Works, it's water, sewer, electric, and streets. And so when I say we, I'm talking about those 4 utilities in particular. And I will note that typically water and sewer are constructed by a contractor or hired out. We're doing more and more of the electric ourselves. And so this keeps the electric utility pretty busy. But that one's coming up. You're going to hear more about Brookstone 7 in just a little bit, so I won't spend any time on that one. Tyranina Point subdivision is actually the one on Mud Lake Road. And what we've been told is that they're speeding up their development process out there. And in fact, this year they want to finish putting in all the streets. That means that all the other infrastructure has to go in at the same time. And so it sounds like they've got great interest in getting that subdivision completed, or at least set up for sales and new houses and all that stuff as soon as they can. And all of this, I'm going to jump down to number 8, 1204 South Main Street. That's the new condos that are going just south of where the Topol gas station or repair station is. And that one's moving along pretty quick. I think they've got most of the water and sewers in. Electric will be coming in soon, and my understanding there is they want to have buildings up or at least substantially done by the end of this summer also. So that one's moving right along. And then I want to, again, just as I'm making the point that it's going to be a busy year, we have all this going on. And even though we have contractors coming in to do a lot of this work, the department heads, the department people are very busy responding to questions, issues that come up, kind of keeping an eye on what the construction is, even though we work with Strand to do that every once in a while. We get in there and check things out too. So it does keep our staff busy, even though a contractor is doing the work. In addition to then, we've got the routine maintenance that we have to do every year. And one of the things that's coming up real soon here is the crack sealing of the streets. We do that in preparation for chip seal, which you'll hear about more. We do that just to maintain our streets as long as we can. In addition to that, we've got to maintain our compost site, which is something you're going to hear about more in future meetings, I think. We clean out the ditches that we own and maintain. And so there's just a lot going on. And I want to, again, for 2 reasons. One, so that those of you that are new have a good sense for what's happening in the city, and for everybody to understand that we're busy. We're darn busy. And that is what I've got for tonight, and I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions. Okay, that usually tells me that I've worn out my welcome and I'll be quiet.
I don't know, Steve. Paul, next on the agenda, here we are. Item 6, presentation on water meter changeout scheduling program.
All right.
You haven't worn out your welcome yet, I hope.
Oh, gosh, I hope not. And we set this up separately so that the thousands of viewers that we get to this program can see how this works. But what this is a way to help with our water meter replacement program. So again, those of you that are maybe not aware of this, we are in the process of changing out every electric and water meter to AMI meters, which stands for Automated Meter Reading Infrastructure. And it will allow us to remotely read all the meters in our territory. So that includes the city of Lake Mills and then also the west side of the lake. And a couple of benefits to this is it helps us, like I say, speed up our meter reading. And simply as an anecdotal piece of information here, we struggled, especially in the months of January and February, with getting our meter reading done on time and getting every meter read. And we look back, and it's now been about a year and a half, and we have not missed one meter reading deadline. And we had a pretty rough winter this past winter. And we have really reduced the number of rechecks that we have to do. So if there was an error, we'd have to send somebody out to actually reread the meter and that sort of thing. And we're only about half done, so we're being very encouraged by this. Second thing, as we get all of these meters installed, we can use it to identify, for the electric side, outage areas. So if we have an outage, we'll be able to go to a map and we'll be able to see what meters are not reporting, and that'll help the guys identify where we might have a problem. And then in regard to water use, these meters store 8 days of data. And so if somebody calls up and says, hey, my water bill is really high or something like that, in the past we'd have to go back, or we'd be looking at data that was possibly 2 months old. Now we can go back and find data that's maybe 8 days old, 8 days to 2 weeks. And then we can more easily correlate what may have been happening in the house that caused it, or is the meter bad or something like that. And we actually have it set up already so that if a meter seems to be showing more water usage than typically, we get a warning. We are able to catch that immediately and contact the homeowner and say, is there something going on there? Excuse me. In the same way with electric. If usage seems to be much higher than typical, we can begin our inspection or our investigation process much quickly. So this is a system that's working. But what's difficult, especially on the water side, is getting the meters installed because we have to get into the house. The electric meters are pretty easy. We can pull the meter, change it, leave a door hanger, and let people know that the reason their clocks are all flashing is that we changed their meter. So what I want to show you here in just a second, I'm going to share a screen, see if I can do this. Are you able to see that, the utility homepage?
All we see is you, Paul.
Well, aren't you lucky? Here we go.
You got to make sure you select the right screen. There we go.
Okay, now hang on a second. Now do you see the homepage?
I do.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So in case you haven't visited our homepage, this is the Lake Mills Light and Water homepage. And what we're doing is sending letters. Actually, we're doing a number of things. We're sending letters to a particular geographic area in the city. We're also contacting individuals that we have contacted in the past to try to get their water meter changed out. We're also going to be doing a bill stuffer in the April bills, and more than likely a newspaper article or ad of some sort, directing people to the website. And then once they get to the website, the letter or whatever will instruct them to go down to where it says schedule water meter change out. And all people have to do is click on that. And you'll see how fast the internet here is in the town of Harmony, moves right along. And they'll come to this page, and all you have to do is click on Book Appointment, and they will come to this page. And I'm going to stop here and just tell you that what we do on the back end of this is we set up the times that are going to be available for customers to go in and set their scheduled time. And so as we get into this more, as you can see on this page, we're starting at 6:30 and going down through about 7:30. We won't do that every day, as you can see. Some days we'll end it at 3. Some days we won't start it as early. We're also establishing Saturday hours. So if that works better for people, we can do it on Saturdays. We will never do it on a Sunday. But this we're all setting up on the back end so that only the appointments or the time slots that are available will show on this. Now we're going to start off setting up appointments about a half hour apart. This is an average, and so this may change as we get into it a little bit more, but if everything goes well, we can change out a water meter in 30 minutes or less. Some cases it may be 2 hours, and in that case we've got a mechanism, and I'll show you that in a second, for contacting other people that have appointments set up and let them know we're running late or we'll have to reschedule or something like that. So there's a lot going on in the background. So here's what happens. Somebody decides that 6:30 a.m. is a good time for us to come and change their meter. And all people have to do is then fill in this information. And I'll note 2 things on here. Number one is that we want both a primary phone and a cell phone. Now the cell phone is required because we will use that to text to confirm that an appointment's been set, to let them know if something's gone wrong where we're not going to be there on time or something like that. And the same way with email. So our hope is that between the cell phone number and the email address, we'll be able to stay in communication with whoever has an appointment. And by the way, people will get an immediate confirmation, just like you do if you order something or set up an appointment. You'll get that immediate confirmation. And then we also send out a reminder 24 hours in advance, and I believe an hour in advance, so that people are reminded that we're going to be there. And hopefully that'll cut down on the number of times we show up and somebody's not there. And that does happen. One of the other things that's on here that we're going to try, and you'll see it's right below the boxes that you fill out, and that is, will you be home at the time of the appointment? And if you are not home, do you give us permission to enter your premises? Our preference, by far and away, our preference is that the people are home. We do not want to go into somebody's home if they're not there, but there may be times when we will have to do that. The other part of this we found is that some people are very COVID aware, and they don't want anybody in their house until they get there, or until the COVID thing is a little more past, if you will, or they would rather we do this change up when they're not there. And so in that case, we document that we entered the building at such and such a time, who was there, how long it took, when they left, that sort of thing. And so we're going to try that under this self-scheduling thing. If we run into too many problems with people being too concerned about somebody being in their house when they're not there, then we're going to pull this. We'll simply put that list aside, and we'll contact those folks at a later time and figure out a way to get in and change their meter. And then just the bottom of this is, this is where we ask them to put in their mobile phone number again, so that we can get the reminders to them if they've got any special instructions. Or in some cases, people will want a neighbor or a father or a brother or sister, somebody notified about this appointment. And so they can put that information in that box on the bottom there. Then they click finalize appointment, and they are sent the reminder, the confirmation email or text, and it's put into our system. The other part that happens on the back end of this, and I can get out of here now, is that in order to do these, or when we do these changes, we do it all through a computer system. So what happens is the guys, for example, go out and they change out an electric meter. All of the information from that meter is entered on a tablet that they're carrying with them, so that the change is immediate, and so that the change goes immediately to the billing system and all that sort of thing. And so by using this particular program, we can begin to set that data up. It's called MCare, but it goes to our billing system, so that we can make those connections as quickly as possible. We're not having to write out slips of paper and worry about losing them and all that kind of good stuff. So what it does, what I'm saying is this is already connected into our billing system, so that anytime a meter is changed, that change shows up as fast as we can get it to show up. So that's what I wanted to show you. And again, two reasons. One is to let you know that we are really going to be ramping up the number of meters, especially water meters, that we're going to be changing out. And secondly, now we almost have a little how-to video that if people have questions, we can pull this out and say, just walk through it this way. So that's what I've got on that one. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
When are you trying to get everything completed by, as far as the meter change-outs?
Mark, I told staff that we want to have this done by the end of the year. And so we are going to do everything we can to reach that goal. It's doable if we can, really make it come together. So that's our goal.
Are you having contractors help with the meter change-outs?
No, we're doing this on our own. What we are going to do, I think you're all familiar with Brian Kane. We may have Brian come in and help us do some communication, maybe even do some change out. But otherwise, in talking to the crews, they're pretty confident that they can make this work.
Mark, you probably know as well as anybody here that we've been talking about this for a while.
Yes.
And some of it has to do with purchase of meters. We've had a real tough time purchasing some meters, and some of it has to do with, Paul was talking about how busy we are this year, but doing Mulberry Street and Main Street in the same year and all those other projects that we've been doing, these guys have had a real tough time being able to get into homes from their schedule, and then people just haven't been real cooperative in letting us in. And so one of the things we thought is the scheduling was a problem. And so this is why we came up with this process, is to say, hey, especially in Lake Mills, because so many people work out of the city, that it was significantly beneficial for most of them to be able to open up their iPhone or their Android, find the way to schedule it and get it scheduled in without having to spend a lot of time on it. So we're hoping this ramps it up. So when Paul says by the end of the year, this is our goal. This is what we've set to achieve. Will I guarantee you that we're going to hit that after what we've been through? I'm hoping this works, but I ain't guaranteeing it.
I don't know if you're being an optimist or a realist there, Steve, or a pessimist or a realist, but yeah, we've got to have a goal. We got to get going on this thing. I mean, we are seeing so many benefits that we can only see those multiply as we get more and more of these in. And the other thing, when we were trying to do this on the phone, Mark, it was literally taking us as long or longer to make the appointment than to change out the meter, because we'd go back and forth and back and forth. So I'm hoping this is a time saver. And again, the guys have committed to getting this done, so we're going to give her a shot. By the way, that means that any of you that are on this call now or on this meeting now know how to go in and schedule your change out. So I'll be looking tomorrow morning to see how many of you have done it.
I did mine 2 years ago.
Maybe we can give you a reward or put a bounty out there. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But
So Paul, the schedule system is way better. Of course, it's going to, streamlining, automating things is always, that helps on both ends of, the homeowner and the person in the city doing the work. But people are going to get this notice and they're going to ignore them. And you're going to be lucky if you get even a third response on it, would be my guess.
I'd be happy.
Great.
No, I'd be happy with that, Mark, if we got a thing. This is not going to be a one-hit deal. We've also got door hangers that we will be putting out. And as I mentioned, what we've done is divided the city into a grid, and I think it's 20 sections on the grid. And so we'll be concentrating very heavy on those, sending letters, door knockers, knocking on doors, making phone calls. And you know, we have work to do on our end to get these things scheduled. And if we open up our hours so that we can do some Saturdays, some earlier in the morning, some later in the days, we're hoping we pick up as many as we possibly can. I will tell you that we got the tip on this system from Wanakee. And it took a little while for them to get rolling. But after doing all the things we've described, you know, letters, door hangers, all that good stuff, it really started to go.
Yeah.
And so we want to control it so that, you know, it doesn't go beyond our means to respond. But first we got to get it rolling to see if that becomes a problem. Yes.
Paul, just a quick question. Maybe I missed you said this in the beginning, but does everybody, with the exception of Steve, need to have theirs changed out, or are there just certain ones that are past a certain age?
All of them. We're
Okay.
going after all of them, Lisa. And am I echoing? We have done. Oh boy, I think we've done about 900 to 1,000 meters so far. We did start with the really old ones, and so now we've worked through most of those. And we are to everybody.
And I think Mark has really hit on an important issue is we've felt this from the beginning. Is response is very difficult. And we've known this from the beginning because, you know, we know when we send out utility bills, the person looks at one line on the utility bill and throws everything else away. And even when we make sustained long-term efforts to get them to cooperate, it's been difficult. So a lot of times, you know, what we've done is we've gone to this easier scheduling process. They'll make phone calls, they'll send letters. Eventually someone's going to show up on their doorstep because we're going to have to change the meters. I mean, by law, you know, DNR requires us to change out so many meters every year. And so we're going to have to knock it down and get it out. And so we cherry picked so far, and we will do our best to get as much cooperation as we can by doing this type of stuff. But eventually, we're going to have to get down. As a regulator, you probably know that we have to get down and knock the door down because some people think that when their meter gets changed, their bill goes up. And I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. And in some cases, their meters might be so old that it might be true, because I think we had one that was almost 40 years old. But in most cases, it's a benefit to everybody involved, because once those new meters are in, we can tell when their water's leaking almost within minutes, and it's really a data thing that allows us to control our water system so much better. So I think it's really going to be in the long term a huge benefit, and I think people will adjust pretty easily. I still get the people who are concerned about the radio control on it, but it's such a minor radio control on it. If you've got a cell phone, you've already got something that's 50 times higher than the radio on this meter. So I just don't know that people should be concerned about that.
Have we started rolling out, or will we roll out soon, the data benefit to the homeowners so that they see the benefit in looking at the data themselves? It's got that capability, I believe, right?
Yeah, really good question, Mark. And WPPI does have that set up. In fact, we will be, it'll probably be later this year, we'll be implementing that so that people can go online and see almost real time. I think it'll be a 24-hour lag in their usage, and both electric and water. And then if they want to make some adjustments, they can do that. But absolutely, that'll be part of it. But we're not quite ready to do that until we get more meters installed. But
well, that will help encourage people to get meters installed as well.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. So like I say, a little later this year, we'll have that up and running.
So I'm thinking about 50% of the population. The other 50% will figure we're invading their privacy.
Yeah.
Well, it will be an incentive to some people. to get it done.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And part of that's generational. You know, I wouldn't care really. I know to go around and turn off all the lights I can, but some folks like that data. They like to see what's happening, and it is a valuable tool, valuable tool if you know how to use it. Absolutely. The other incentives we're going to have, and I just thought of this, is that we can either have, handsome Steve knock on the door and get the water meter changed, or they can have my ugly mug show up, and then, either way, they're going to be incentivized to get this thing done, right?
Right.
Big old guys.
Yeah, big old guys. So that's what I got, unless you got some more questions. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate you putting up with all this, but I think we're going in the right direction with a lot of things. So I appreciate you letting me finish these up.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, next, item 7 on the agenda, discussion, recommendation on infrastructure at Brookstone Phase 7.
So 2 years ago, we entered into an agreement with Paul Giusti, Riverwood LLC, who was the owner of the real estate that was Brookstone, to finalize out 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I think we actually ended up incorporating 6 and 7 into 6, so we probably only have 9, but I'll have to see how that works out. The 6 went so fast. We thought we'd have like 4 to 5 years before we'd be looking at number 7. They will actually have all the lots sold within 1 year. And so we've actually we recouped our money that we invested in that. This project will be a little bit more expensive than that one, even though there are fewer lots. And I will let Brandon explain that. So, Brandon, if you want to go into the details of the construction.
But before Brandon goes into that, I have a question that
Sure.
Steve, you could probably answer better, and that's, in my mind, this is a little unusual in that it's residential, work for a residential area, which the city is doing. Normally the developer does the work and dedicates it to the city. In this case, we are doing all the work. And so can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Well, first of all, you would say normal. That's not true. Historically, if you look at the larger cities, they did all the infrastructure for the development and built them.
I'm talking about my experience in Lake Mills.
Yeah, Lake Mills, we historically had the developers do it. What happened was we ran out of lots in 2015, maybe 16, which was basically the ridge. And so in order to allow for the continued development, the council and city staff approached Paul Giusti and asked him if we could continue that. So yes, we cut a deal with him where we would basically do the whole process of the designing the infrastructure, doing the preliminary and final plats, and putting it out for bid and installing it all. And then we would special assess them, and the special assessment worked in a couple of ways. They had 5 years to pay back the special assessment, or as the lots sold, they had to pay the special assessment. So you'll note in this situation, with all the lots virtually selling within a 1 year period, we will have all our money back within 1 year. I also noted that the developer was stating that it was much cheaper for him to do it this way than it was the other way. And to give you a little bit of an idea why that is, their people design according to what they are used to. They submit it to the city. The city looks at it and says that doesn't meet city standard. So then we send it back to them. They have to redo it, and then they submit it to us again, and we send it back saying you haven't quite met the conditions that we have yet. And we go through that process. And during that whole process, not only do they have to pay their engineer, they have to pay our engineer and our planner and our lawyer and all those people who are reviewing it. So now you're starting to really double up on the cost. So the developers come to the point that you design the infrastructure, you install it, we'll buy the lots and sell it. It's easier and cheaper, and we don't have to go through a lot of work. So it's worked out pretty well for us. I note that Mud Lake Road, the developer between Riverwood, who actually the home builder ended up being Loose Homes, they looked at it and said the lots in Brookstone 6 were cheaper than the lots in Tyrrhenia Point, and the reason was because of the additional cost associated with the review. So he was pretty much in favor of in the future doing projects in a similar fashion. I will also note that Whitewater, Fort Atkinson, and probably Jefferson and Watertown are going to copy this process. Based on the report that came out of Jefferson about the housing shortage in the county and the problems with getting developers to pick up the risk in these more rural areas, they have opted to go through that process and do essentially what we're doing. So a certain number of cities have been doing this historically and always have. So like Janesville, Beloit, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, they've always done it this way. To a certain extent, for smaller cities, it was easier to do it the other way. But then what we discovered is that we weren't getting the construction the way we wanted it. So it ended up being a lot of process-oriented things. So it's not costing us anymore. In fact, we get all our money. It's making the lots cheaper in the long run. So that's good for people who are buying houses because the cost of housing is skyrocketing substantially. So anything we can do to save money in the process is a benefit. So I guess that's where we're at. Any questions or anything else you want me to hit, Mark?
So not every development is done this way. Some developers decide to do it all themselves too, correct?
Yes. I would think that maybe in the future you will see it become more typical because there's a real drive, and I'm not sure how to, I don't know the long-term future, but right now there's a lot of reports out about the uncontrolled cost of housing. So housing in Lake Mills has been going up 10% per year. Most people's income hasn't been going up that fast. So more and more people are falling into the asset limited, income constrained employed. So they're above the poverty level, but they're below the level where you can afford a home in Lake Mills. And so what do you do in order to be able to pull those costs down? Well, this is one of those methods. The other one is how much we charge for impact fees. That's always another one at the top of the list. Another one's like sidewalks. I don't suggest that we waive any of those, but what we do is we try and figure out how we control our costs in the best fashion possible. And most developers are going to start looking at this and saying, hey, I can tell you now that a 7,500 square foot lot in Cottage Grove is going to cost you $100,000. And most people that work in the Lake Mills area can't afford a $100,000 lot. The lots that we provided to Loose Homes and Riverwood last year, we got them out at about $37,000 a lot. So you're going to, even if this one, which because of some constraints that we have with rock, are going to be a little bit more expensive, they're still way under $100,000 and probably under what the lots cost on Love Lake Road.
So I'm just going to say that it's a decision to do this one way or another, and it's there's advantages one way and there's disadvantages that same way. And me personally, I'm not in favor of assisting growth as some other people are. That's just the way I am. To me, this is a way of assisting growth. Whether that's good or bad, I'm not going to say. That everybody's got a different opinion on that. But it's really not a decision for the Public Works Board. It's a decision for the City Council, and that's. I just wanted to point it out, especially since we have a couple of City Council members here.
I'll go into some of our logic when we do this. So we have a zero levy. So every year we give out how much in pay raises and how much do we have to consume in inflation in other areas, because the price of timber certainly didn't go down, and the cost of asphalt didn't go down, and the price of salt didn't go down, and so we're generally incorporating into every new budget about 3% in inflation, and then 1.5% to 1% in wages, and then 4 to 5% in benefits because health insurance goes up, and some of those costs that are managed by other areas that are beyond our control. So when you're looking at a zero levy, how do you accomplish affording those costs? There's only one way by state statute that you can incorporate that, and that's net new construction. So when you get that net new construction, that calculation then starts providing you the additional levy that you can add to your budget. So historically, in the last 6 years, since 14, I'll say, we've been getting enough net new construction to pay our wages and some of the inflation, but not all of it. So we've been kind of thinning out what we do here and there. We're trying to improve our processes. If we had zero growth, what would our options be? Our options would be to get rid of police officers, get rid of street employees, to eliminate all kinds of other positions or activities that we do. So, if you looked at parks and you said we're going to get rid of parks, well, 65% of parks is funded by Sandy Beach. So between the trailers and all the fees that they pay down there for lifts and getting into the park, pays about $400,000 worth of the park's budget, which is $600,000. So parks isn't going to do you any good. So then now you're starting to really look at the core processes of what a city does, and that's police, fire, streets. And so how do you attack that without having some level of growth? If there were some method, you watched us, Mark, we attack every technical process that we can do. We look at the data, we look at the technology, we try and add technology where we can to improve what we do and save us money as much as we can. But there's only so much you can do. And I agree to a certain extent, we're in a pyramid game. But it's not my doing, and it's not your doing, and it's not the council's doing.
It's state law, huh?
It's state law.
Yeah.
So I guess I've got maybe a comment and a question. There's this larger discussion that, at least for me, would require a fermented beverage to talk about, why do we have to grow just to sustain? That's a bigger question. But I guess, Mark, to your more specific point on this agenda item, does the city staff get to decide each time a developer comes forward whether the city wants to do the design and build the infrastructure or whether to require the developer to do it? I mean, I would assume it's in the city's control, and that's kind of what you were saying, Mark. It's a decision point each time.
It is a council decision point. The council did decide to pursue that process. I would say that if we allowed it as an option, it would probably be one that more of them would pursue because it does provide a financial benefit to them. It doesn't cost us anything. We bill them 100% of the cost, but it does provide them with the ability to produce lots at a lower price.
But so are you in a position though, say a developer comes forward with a proposal and they want the city to do that work and the city for whatever reason doesn't have the capacity that year to take it on, are you able to say, no, sorry, we can't do that. You'll have to design your own and build your own?
Yes. Most of them will come forward and say they'll want to do it that way. But then when they start getting into the process where we actually do all the review, they start to say, hey, this is costing a lot more than I anticipated. And so we do not, when you sit down and you start talking to all the other cities, and they're going to look at you and they're going to say, all the developers want to develop in Waukesha and Madison and Milwaukee because the risk is substantially low. So how do you reduce the risk? And that's kind of what we're starting to look at is across the county is how do you reduce their risk in order to be able to get some development to occur in the region? And that was one of them. From the standpoint of we couldn't even get developers to look at us in 14, 15, and 16. We literally had to go out and start saying, hey, we're going to develop these, Paul. We're pretty sure that we can find builders to build on it. Well, before we had the infrastructure and he had sold all the lots to a builder, and probably the same thing will happen with 7 here. But that, if you looked at that report that I provided you, there is no city in the county that built more houses than Lake Mills, and we were still appreciating at 10% and still significantly short in new houses or households. So, and that includes apartment buildings. And if you think about how many apartments we had in the last 4 years, that's huge. So what I'm looking at is how can you continue to keep the single family housing and not, because what's going to happen is if they can't build in the city, they're going to build at the fringes of the city. And that's worse than having them build in the city. Because we will, and again, I'll read about Monona and what they're talking about. Did you read in the editorials or the letters to the editor in the paper about Monona, about Deansville, Elm Grove, Butler? Go down the list of wholly bounded cities that now have problems with growth, and they can't grow. They end up where their tax base is not growing. Well, if you don't have net new construction, you don't have any levy increase. If you don't have any levy increase, how do you support what you have existing? Because your expenses are going up no matter what. Even if the employees were held at zero for the whole time, your expenses are still going up.
So Steve, does the levy go down or does the levy stay the same? Because the net value does continue to increase without net new construction.
Right, but the increase in the levy, the increase in assessed value does not count against the levy. The levy is the levy. So if it's a $2 million levy, it's $2 million unless you have net new construction. The appreciation doesn't count as net new construction. Okay, so
Wow.
you can, your assessed value.
That's a wonderful state law. Wow.
Your assessed value can grow by $100 million. You're only going to get a $2 million levy. You have to remember there are certain features of this that tie together. One of them is a levy is the amount of money that you get. A tax rate is the amount of money that you apply against the assessed value.
Yeah.
So, and then there's an expenditure restraint clause. So your expenses can only go up so much, but your revenues can only go up. So your tax levy can only go up so much. So there are certain features, let's say in the last couple of years, last year, the year of the election and the year after the election, gas tax went up quite a bit. So we took in quite a bit of additional revenue for those two processes. They have to be spent all in public works and the street department. But that kind of cushioned us in the fact that we didn't hit the net new construction that we required. But there have been years, particularly in 2010, 11, and 12, where the shared revenues and gas taxes went down substantially. And so then how do you make up for that? And so you have all these side revenues that rise and fall depending on what the legislature feels like doing, or, you know, if you have a sales tax that's based on the economy. We don't have a sales tax, but we have some of these elastic revenues, and then we have this inelastic revenue, which is the property tax. But property tax is locked in at what the levy is. And the only way that goes up is by net new construction. So if you're not building homes or apartments or industrial sites or commercial sites, you're going down essentially, because that $2 million you had last year isn't worth $2 million this year. So it's a catch-22. And if you asked me to write a report, and I think I could get every administrator and manager in the county, we would agree that the state intent is to force growth. And there's some good articles out there that have been put in the municipality by the league, which were done by, I think, the Public Policy Institute, that talk about this problem. And I've made sure that every council member who was working on this project at the time had read that, so that they understood what we're battling against. And looking at, and then they went as far as to compare cities who had adequate net new construction, some who were marginal, and some who didn't have any or who had lost, and then comparing what those cities are doing. And it's stark. You want to find out what cities are doing and how they are balancing and what they can provide compared to the cities that aren't. It's really stark. It makes you really wonder what's going to happen in the future. And I agree, it's a pyramid scheme. I'm not going to argue with that, but I don't know how, within the scope that I've had, Mark, I've evaluated every possible option out there. And it's like when Mick comes to me and tells me, how do I get new officers? I can't afford to pay for the salary increases you guys are having, much less another officer. So let's talk about what the state could do to create an exception or provide additional aid. I prefer an exception in the levy for adding police officers, because in 5 years from now, the legislature gets a hair and they cut the revenue that they gave us for police officers. Now we got to figure out how to pay them, or we got to lay them off. And when you lay people off, you still have all that expense related to the unemployment, because the way we do it is we pay the unemployment. So it's a no-win situation for us. That's why you know that I try and balance the number of employees versus the number of contractors. I want to make sure that we have enough full-time employees to respond in an emergency, but I want to have enough contractors so that if we have an economic shock or contraction, I can just not use Brandon. I don't have to pay him. I don't have any unemployment. I don't have anything I need to send Brandon or Dustin's way if there's a contraction. Whereas no matter what happens, I still have to pay Paul.
Yep.
Nothing personal, Brandon.
Well, thanks for the education, Steve. Any other on that topic? If not, we'll go into. We'll let Brandon talk a little.
Oh, that's all really good stuff. I mean, yeah, I've learned a lot there. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. So we're talking about Brookstone Phase 7 infrastructure. Can you guys see that? It's like yeah, okay. So Brookstone, the subdivision as a whole, is basically this whole square. I hope you can see my cursor. I think so. That was developed in a number of phases. We're on Phase 7 now, starting in the early 2000s. There was a big lull. I think phase 5 was the last one in 2006, maybe, or something like that. And then, phase 6 was last year. So before I move on to other things, I want to point out this giant white space here in the kind of west side of the subdivision. There's a very large stormwater pond there that I just want to point out where that is, because I'll talk about it in a little bit here. So phase 7 is an extension of, trying to get to a good sheet here to zoom in, of American Way and Crestview Lane. So on this page, north is to the right, south is to the left. The left edge of this page is also the southern limit of the city. So we're extending American Way maybe 300 feet, creating a new intersection with Crestview Lane, and then extending Crestview Lane, what is that, about 700 feet or so, maybe 850 maybe. And so that will create 18 new lots. Those lots will have sanitary sewer, water, and the streets will have storm sewer. So, they will be fully developed, including the sidewalks will be built as part of this project. As Steve mentioned earlier, this phase of construction has some interesting challenges with it, that there is high-ish bedrock in this area. We did a whole number of soil borings throughout the future phases of Brookstone here. We had 4 in this area. One of the highest bedrock places was right in the new intersection here that I believe it was at about 5 feet, if I remember right. But generally it was at 6 to 8 feet. So you may notice if you reviewed the bid tab that was included, the cost estimate for the project that was included on the agenda, that we had quite a bit of rock excavation built in for sanitary sewer and water main, and then a little bit for storm sewer as well. That's because we will definitely have some. We're not sure how consistent that rock layer is between the boring locations. The borings were spread out, say, a couple hundred feet apart from each other. It may be a straight line between them. It may jump up, it might go down. We also had a pretty good variability in what the native soil is. So we also had quite a bit of granular backfill built into the project. There was 2 borings that showed some native material that would probably be reusable for trench backfill, but then 2 of the borings showed material that probably would not. So to what extent each material goes, we're not quite sure. So I think it's important to note that of that cost estimate, there's about $200,000 worth of rock excavation and granular backfill that we're not sure how much we're going to have to use. So we definitely will have to use some, but it might be half, it might be a quarter, it might be all of it. We're not quite sure. So I guess a couple other features of this drawing that I'm showing is we did design a full grading plan for all 18 lots. That was something that the developer wanted us to do. It's just a lot. He would either have to have the city, like Steve was just saying, do it, via Strands design and having the contractor for this project grade the lots, or he would have to hire another engineer to do a grading plan and some separate contractor on the side. So I think that kind of also speaks to what Steve was saying about keeping the cost down. This is one designer, one contractor doing all the grading for all 18 lots. A couple notable features for me is the south end of the project. Crestview Lane will be built up compared to existing grade about 6 feet. That is needed because of sanitary sewer, that the sanitary sewer can only be so deep. And to build a home that can then flow to the sanitary sewer, the lots need to be built up. And then also, likewise, the street can't be too low because you would have driveways that are very steep and things like that. The city does have kind of a standard driveway maximum slope that we had to accommodate. So the end of the road, you may note that there's quite a bit of contours in this area, that we have a slope back down to the existing ground at the south limit of the property that, you know, is being developed here. So we're not grading onto the neighbor at all or outside the city. You know, that will be a kind of like wild type slope where, you know, it's public right of way, a lot of it, that, you know, that won't be necessarily, you know, mowed off the end of the road. The lots will, at that corner, will have, you know, a significant slope that you could handle a number of ways. You know, the future homeowner could deal with the slope, or they could put in a retaining wall. But then it also offers like the benefit of having a walkout basement available. So that was one kind of trade-off there.
Brandon, on that slope, can I ask how Crestview Lane is intended to be continued further south, correct? So how would that, if it was continued south, that drop off, is that practical to deal with if it's continued?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a roadway grading standpoint, you would, you know, just drop the road back down. To serve anything south of this would require a different sanitary sewer route or a pump station, so that the sanitary sewer concern wouldn't be there anymore. So you could drop the road down, you know, fairly. I mean, 6 feet sounds like a lot, but you can drop a road 6 feet pretty fast. If needed. So in terms of, you know, when that's extended in the future, whenever that is, you know, from a road grade standpoint, I'm not super concerned about it.
Thanks.
Yeah. One other thing that I mentioned earlier was the stormwater. I'll get to a different drawing here. So this is American Way, I think. Yes. So the stormwater for Brookstone, the subdivision as a whole, was pre-planned. They actually platted all of Brookstone, including phases 6, 7, 8, 9, you know, preliminarily like 20 years ago. And it was planned that all of the phases all the way to Harvey Road, including the one we're working on now, would flow down a storm sewer in American Way into that large basin that I mentioned earlier. And so that storm sewer had been stubbed out to the current limits of American Way, the current eastern limits of American Way. And so we'll be connecting to that 24-inch storm sewer and collecting the stormwater from this new phase and sending it to that basin. So that, I think, is, you know, a notable feature. I guess, you know, other than that, I mean, we have about 1,000 feet of water main, about 800 feet of sanitary sewer. American Way is a little bit wider street than Crestview Lane. It has a 66-foot right-of-way. Crestview Lane has a 60-foot right-of-way. I believe American Way is 38 back-to-back, and Crestview Lane, I think, is 35 back-to-back. Back to curb to back to curb. We're showing stop signs at Crestview Lane being installed as part of this project. American Way would be a straight through, although there's not anywhere you can go to the east. But there was some discussion with phase 6 previously that at some point, depending on, eventually American Way will connect to Harvey Road. And at that time, the city may have to institute some different stop controls or speed control devices, because right now American Way is basically free flow all the way to Brookstone Drive. There's no stop signs on it. There is at the intersection of Brookstone Drive, but you would have a pretty long stretch also going downhill mostly that people would, you know, not have to stop at. That just thought it was noteworthy that, you know, we don't have anything on American Way now, but in the future you may have a stop at one of these intersections. Does anybody have any questions or anything else you'd like me to go into in more detail?
Is there any new electric?
Yes, great question. Thank you. We've been working closely with the electric utility on how to serve this facility or this subdivision. I believe that part of it is already kind of set up. They ran some on the, let me go back up to the plat map, probably easiest to, oh, here you go, this will work. So this cul-de-sac was created in phase 6, and they ran some of that up the backyards here, kind of planning for these homes. I believe that some of these might be able to be served off existing infrastructure. I'm kind of looking at either Paul or Dwayne, but yeah, I believe there might be electric in the backyards here.
There's
But either way,
there's electric all the way around the outside of the plat. So it
Yeah.
runs down Harvey Road to the south end of that subdivision and then runs along the south edge all the way to Brookstone. And then, yes, they ran up along the back edges of those lots. So the western lots will have access to the existing electric. And then we just have to provide some up the back of the eastern lots, which will
yeah.
also then serve the lots west of them when we do that.
So what Steve's saying is right now, if you can see my cursor right along the left or the south edge of this, there's like a large looping distribution line that runs right there. So they'll have to hook onto that and run some up the backyards here from one direction or the other. And as part of this, we'll work with gas and telephone and charter to, or I say we, meaning the team of the city and the developer, will work with them to get all that infrastructure in there as well.
Any other questions for Brandon? If not, I would entertain a motion. We have a prepared packet, a prepared motion in our packet.
Yeah, hold
Mark-
on for a second
Mark-
there.
Yeah, Mark. I believe that Bennett Rupplinger had to leave the meeting. And so we no longer have a quorum. So everything from now on will be informational. We will not be able to take any action. I want to note that the plat will be going to the Planning Commission in March. And then both the plat and this bid set will be going to the council at the April 6th meeting. But you have all the information that's available.
When will this be sent out for bids?
It's out right now, actually. So the bids will be opened on the 18th. So if there's any contractors watching this in the future,
And just for the benefit of city council members and new board members, most of the Public Works Board motions are like this one where it says discussion/recommendation. Most Public Work Board decisions are actually recommendations to the city council. Not all, but most. So it moves to the city council without a quorum here. If nothing else on that one, we move on to item 8, discussion recommendation on 2021 street and sidewalk maintenance program.
Steve or Paul, did you want any comments before I begin?
No, for the council members, the new council members, probably in a study session, we will go over how we move to the maintenance program. Mark and John probably have a pretty long history. Greg may not, Greg Polachek, but about 2014, 15 mark, we moved to this new style maintenance program. And so a lot of the things that Dwayne will talk about, like Pacer and how we use that to score and determine where we're at, and then the grades of the streets, which I'm sure he will, he's pretty proud of. So he'll go into that. So Dwayne, you're up.
All right, thanks, Steve. I'll try to give a kind of a broad range description of how we work our program. Let's just start with, there's 36.6 miles of streets in the city. About 1.7 of that is state connecting highway. While that isn't our maintenance, obviously it was a reconstruction project in the last couple of years, it does require staff to do snow plowing, some of the maintenance on that street, the crack filling, things like that. There is also an additional 1.9 miles of county trunk highway within the city, and 33 miles of streets outside. So we're looking at 73.2 miles of road, about 33 miles that the city must maintain on a regular basis. If you get into the county roads and the state roads, there are additional funding that can be implemented to help with that maintenance. So in general, we're looking at the 33-mile municipal, roughly 33 miles or 66 miles of lane miles of streets. The state requires through Whistler, and Whistler is an acronym, Wisconsin Information System for Local Roads. It's a database that the state requires us to keep. We must do a surface rating every 2 years. We typically try to keep that up to date on a regular basis every year. So we don't fall to that 2-year period. It does take some time to maintain that database. The rating program that we use is called PACER. It's Pavement Surface Evaluation and Rating. It was developed by UW-Madison. We've been using that throughout the life of this database. To give you an idea of what the rating is, it's a surface rating, and they give you parameters on a rating from 1 to 10. A 10 being a brand new street. Mud Lake Road was just constructed last year. That is a 10 in our rating scale this year. A 1 being the street has failed. It's basically a gravel road at that point, which is a different rating. But you are probably needing a total reconstruction at that point. In the past, as Steve mentioned, in 2014, we started this program and we went through some study sessions with this Public Works Board, and we developed a program to do maintenance and a life cycle process for these streets. In the past, there wasn't as much maintenance done. So what would happen? In a 20 to 40 year time frame, a street that like Mud Lake Road, if no maintenance is done to it over that time frame, a total reconstruction is going to be required in a short amount of time, probably 20 to 40 years. The goal with the maintenance plan is to stretch that out as much as possible to the 60-year life cycle plan. In doing so, what we're looking at doing is we have established a 7-year cycle, and every 7 years, and we'll just take it from the life of a street, Mud Lake Road, in 7 years, we will probably likely chip seal that street. Before that, we will, as Steve said, we'll probably do some crack filling on that street to maintain the integrity of the surface. And quickly on the integrity of the surface, what's the worst time of the year for our streets? We're in it. It's the freeze-thaw cycles. It's the 40-degree day where everything's melting, and the 15 to 20-degree day at night, freezing that water that's in those cracks and popping the asphalt and creating potholes. So this time of year, I don't like the temperature changes. I would rather see 70 degrees and stay there, or below freezing, because this really does damage on our streets at this time of year. That being said, our cycle is new construction, either through development or through a project, every 7 years running chip seal to keep those cracks at a minimum. At a certain point, either 2 or 3 cycles of chip seal, we're probably looking at a mill and overlay, which is going to resurface the top 2 inches. We'll continue through that cycle, and at a certain point, the base course is going to deteriorate. We're probably going to have to look at a pulverization. We're trying to keep that 7-year cycle continuing as long as possible to extend the life and do it in a cost-effective manner. And to give you a little indication of what I mean by the cost-effective manner, a chip seal costs generally around $2 a square yard. A mill and overlay costs about $20 a square yard. A pulverization is about $40 a square yard. And a reconstruction, Brandon, I don't have the recent numbers, but probably in the range of $120 to $200 per square yard. I do have that number somewhere. So when you multiply that over, we are in the range of 4.4 million square yards throughout the city. So if every 40 years we're going to spend $200 a square yard to fix something, we're trying to do it at $2 a square yard or in that $2 to $30 a square yard versus that total reconstructed. So it gives you an idea of why we do this program. Just kind of an overview. Any questions so far? All right. I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about this year's program. And one second. This year's program and some work that was done by this board back in August. We generally have this discussion during the budget process in August, and then we also revisit it and refine it. Again, as the spring comes, Dave and I and staff will reevaluate what those freeze-thaw cycles are doing to us. I'm not seeing, I don't have a double screen, so I'm only working in the PDF. Is everybody able to see the map?
Yes, looks good.
Good.
Yes.
All right. This is the 2021 proposed street maintenance map. It was one that was created for the August 7th meeting. In green, you'll see the three streets that we talked about earlier, Jefferson, West Lake Street, and Reed Street. Those are total reconstructions. Those are in the package that Brandon has put together. That is not in this maintenance, but I show it here to give an idea of some of the streets. It does get evaluated in the PACER program. The next color, obviously, is the blue area. We're looking at Veterans, a portion of Church Street connected to the West Lake Street project, and then the northernmost piece of Mulberry Street from Moss to Tyranina to out to the county limits as mill and overlay. And then all of the other areas are chip seal, the pink, Sandy Beach Road, Catlin Drive, a portion of Pinnacle. In particular, I'll just mention when we see the other spreadsheets. For example, Catlin Drive was done in 2014. We are now at 2021. We're in that 7-year period, and we are looking to do a chip seal on that street. Any questions while I'm in that?
Dwayne, you should probably mention, because we're going to hear about it, there's one block stretch between what we did for Mulberry last year and what will be milled and overlaid. And so you probably should explain why that one block isn't going to be worked on.
Great point, Steve. I agree. You'll note that last year's project on Mulberry Street, or 2 years ago, that street went to approximately Grant Street, maybe a half a block north of Grant Street. The reason that between Moss and that endpoint is not being done is because in the later years of the CIP plan, East Prospect and Moss Street will get reconstructed. That portion requires storm sewer. It does not have storm sewer now. And the route for that storm sewer is through that block. So what we will experience is a new street to the south, a mill and overlay to the north, and a block in between that will be in poor shape. Steve, your mic was muted. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, that's because I swore, Dwayne. I said it's going to be rougher than hell.
Moving on, I will go to the Not that one. Although this one might be a good one to look at. This is part of the PACER rating, and it kind of gives you some it's some information that we use when we go through our program. 10 being an excellent, new construction, works down through very good, and on the right-hand side kind of gives us our plan of what we do. In general, we will look to crack fill on a 9, or crack fill on a 5 through a 9, chip seal on a 5 through 8, mill and overlay on a 3 through 5, pulverize on a 2 through 4, and then total reconstruction once it gets into that 1 to 3 range. I am now in the spreadsheet that we provided at the August 7th meeting, and I'll try to go through this quickly. The top half of the spreadsheet is really our capital improvement plan, and if you notice where my cursor is, it's the projected year where each of these streets, at least at this time, the capital improvement plan is always dynamic and gets reviewed every August. This is the current plan and the year that is projected for those streets. As you can see, in 2021, we were looking at Reed Street, Lake Street, Church Street, and Jefferson Street, with tentative plans for Oak Street being the 22 project. Again, these are always open for discussion at this board and at the council, and we will revisit those tonight and again in August. That being said, as we move down this spreadsheet, in yellow in this column was our projections for this year and is basically represented in that map. Our current budget for this year's maintenance program is $300,000. Our projection with the work that we were doing back in August, we had projected about $277,000 to do this work. Again, using very rough numbers, $2 for chip seal, $20 for mill and overlay, and $40 for pulverizing. So today I will now move into some other packet information. This is a more detailed description of that same program. So this is 2021. These are streets that are rated 5 through 8. They are projected to be chip sealed this year. Using an estimate of the last 3 years, you'll note that we've now wheeled these streets. We've kind of decided where the limits of the project will be. We're taking it off of the information from the Whistler program and verifying exactly where we're going to stop and start the project. And we have an estimated cost of about $51,000 for the chip seal program on the streets located. One note: when we have lower chip seal program, we typically use the county as our contractor, and we use our joint local road funds with the county to lower that cost, that shared revenue or that shared cost with the county on the road aid. We use the chip seal program to receive those funds back from the county. So it will reduce that $51,000. It's incorporated into the budget. I did list a number of projects that we could potentially add on if staff or if the board would prefer. Hub Street, there's a construction going on at 715, so we pulled it out of the list. Fayetteville Road, which is a half street, it's half town, half city street. What's happened in the past is we have worked with towns when they're ready to do their chip seal, we'll work with them. In fact, we did Harvey Road a year ago in that manner. And then also there was an area where the old skate park was on South CP Avenue that when we chip sealed the last time, the skate park was there, so we didn't chip seal there. The good news is we're very far along on our chip seal program, and as Steve said, we're in that 7-year range. So there's a limited amount of chip seal this year. What we will see in the next couple of years is we will probably see a sharp increase in the number of chip seal streets, because we're going to be starting back over in the bulk that we did for between 5 and 7 years ago. One other note on the bottom of that page, we have been having discussions with the Parks Department as well as facilities in looking at some of the parks parking lots. We've looked at the fire station parking lot to see if there's some additional streets that we may, or parking lots that we may want to add to the chip seal program. Again, that will be budget dependent, and we potentially would include that in this contract. Any questions before I move on?
Dwayne, I just had a question on your last comment. I think you showed veterans, I don't know if it's road or lane, as one of the areas for work this year. And doesn't that go behind the fire department there?
It does. So veterans is a mill and overlay, and that would run between the curbs that are on that street. The fire station.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. The fire station itself, the parking lot and the route inside the fire station lot, that parking lot is due for some maintenance, whether that's crack filling and some kind of sealant, or crack filling and some chip seal.
That's distinct from the street itself, though, so it wouldn't be covered under this. Okay.
Correct.
And then that one block area that Steve swore about, when would that be due for work if it's not done in 2021?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think I looked away and it was 28. Yeah, it's Mulberry, but it's tied to the East Prospect Street project.
Oh, right.
So and Moss Street. So I think if I remember correctly, that was like 28, Dwayne. That was on the capital project. Yeah.
I'm pulling it back up. 25.
Okay, so it'll be about 4 years. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. That was the chip seal program. Again, very similar to what we had in the original. And the last page that I will show you, I shouldn't say that, there's two more. So this is our asphalt pavement maintenance on the mill and overlay program. Again, the streets we showed you on the map are estimated at about $67,000. This is just the cost for the overlay at $10 a square yard. When we do those overlays, we also do some base patching, some curb replacement, and that dollar amount generally rises. But for this estimate, I'm just showing you to this point what the asphalt cost is for the overlay. Paul had talked earlier about the water main replacement on East Lake Street. So we have added a 2021 possible East Lake Street water main replacement. What our intentions, or at least our thoughts are there, is that the water main would be replaced. The water department would pay for the 2-inch binder patch. And then we would look to do, instead of a chip seal, which that block was in the chip seal program, we would look to do a mill and overlay for that area and provide a new surface on that portion of the street. So that is a possible add to discuss tonight. The next possible add has been in the works for a while. It's in a development agreement with Tower Street. As the developer in that area installs the curb and sidewalk that's required in the development agreement, that street was scheduled for a pulverization a number of years ago in our program. We've held that off because of some development of some lots there. So I did put a placeholder for that work as well. So we're looking at 161,000 with the chip seal of 51,000. And as I noted earlier, this is just the overlay cost. So if we add a low end of 50% addition and a high end of 100% addition, we're in the range of 242 to 322,000 as an estimate. I'll note that we also have a cost that is carried over from last year. That is the Pinnacle Drive haul route maintenance that was done late in the year. That invoice is being processed by the state through the DOT project. So in actuality, we have a $300,000 2021 budget, a $92,900 2020 reserve amount, for a total of $392,900 available. And our estimate in yellow is $315 to $395. Of course, that variability on all of that patching really comes as we get into the project. One second. And as we specifically look at areas that are not draining properly, are cracked, we'll have some repairs on those streets. To give you an example of a very heavy repair street that we did last year was East Lake Street from the bridge east. We did some scratch level courses to make it smoother. We replaced quite a bit of curb. We also did a lot of patching of the base course throughout that street. Give you a ballpark figure, that was 90% added on to that initial cost. So on the high end. Now, as I talked with staff, that was probably one of the largest amounts of add-on work, that 90% add-on. So I feel pretty comfortable with our 50 to 100% add-on cost to get us in that ballpark of our budget. Any questions? Otherwise, I have one last. I'm going to talk about the sidewalk real quick.
So Dwayne, you don't have quotes yet for this year, do you?
So the plan is that tonight, the intention was to give a recommendation to the council, as you mentioned earlier. The council, we will present this to the council next week. If the council agrees, we will go to add the following week, and we will open in April, early April, and present the bids both for concrete and for asphalt, our annual maintenance program bids, to the council for award probably in middle of April.
Thanks.
Any more questions on the street portion? Otherwise, I'm going to switch to sidewalk. Maybe. I guess not. I can't find my PDF. It won't give me a choice, but I'll explain. We have $15,000 in the fund. That is the annual sidewalk replacement or repair fund. The Public Works Department keeps and the city staff. Thank you, Steve. City staff keeps a log of complaints and trip hazards. We have staff evaluates those trip hazards, either puts some fill in for the time being, or at least paints them to try and bring attention to pedestrians for those. We add those to this list. We continually add to the list. In fact, last year we got some calls after our program was done. We tried to do as much as we could until the budget was expended. As you'll see here, we are looking at just shy of $12,000 already claimed with complaints that have come to us already. That leaves us about another $3,000 for future complaints. I know that this freeze-thaw cycles have not been good to us. So I expect we'll be getting some more phone calls, and that $3,000 will be claimed probably pretty quickly. If not, what the program has been by this board has been to continue to move in a counterclockwise direction. And we are currently in the Lakeshore Drive, Fremont College, Lakeview Avenue area. And we continue to move to the south from there with those extra funds, doing evaluations without a complaint. Any questions on that spreadsheet? We are required to provide this to you and to the council. Again, it is a dynamic document, but this is the current status. And we will provide this list to the contractor in the bid documents later this month. I open it back up to questions. Otherwise, that should be the end of my presentation.
Okay. Thanks, Dwayne.
You're welcome.
And since we can't make a motion to recommend to the city council, we'll move on to item 9 on the agenda is recommendations for future agendas. So, Steve, do you know anything that's coming up?
I do not.
Okay. So,
There has been no, I mean, we've had some inquiries, but nothing official, and we haven't really looked at the budgets for next year. You know, July, we'll probably start seeing the capital improvement plan and those types of things. But at this point in time, I don't have anything.
I don't know if I've actually said this before or if I just thought this before, but I thought that it would be good if we went through one of the utilities at least once a year, if not all the utilities once a year, to just go over kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive and especially look at the finances so that we're, you know, I know Betsy and everybody keeps track of the finances, Dwayne, or I mean, Paul, but you know, look at the finances, look at what's coming up with, say, the wastewater, you know, just kind of do a deep dive, looking forward a year, 2 years, 5 years, and looking at the finances.
In May, we generally do our tour. So maybe this April, we do a utility.
Yeah, and I know it takes time, staff time to do things like this, so I'm always conscious of that, but I think there's benefit too, both for the board and for the utility.
Yeah, certainly doable. I wonder, Mark, would you just want to send me a list of questions? Maybe I can get a little more focus there so I'm not hitting the target you want to hit and not bouncing all over the place. And then we can do that across the board for every utility with what types of things you want to hear about specifically. And we'd be happy to do that.
You know, like water is going to be a little bit more difficult because our wells are spread out, the water towers and others. So I would probably, you know, take a tour bus of some sort, whereas wastewater is all in one location.
I'm not talking about looking at things with eyeballs. I'm talking about looking at things on paper.
Yeah, understood. And that's, yeah. So if you anybody actually on the board has got things that they want to look at in this, you know, deep dive or overview, whatever, we'll be happy to put something together. And I think the idea of doing a utility or a department per meeting for a while might be a little more, what's the word, bearable?
Yeah, not all in one meeting, because that's, like you said, like you implied, a bit unbearable.
Yeah. Not that it's, you know, it's exciting stuff, but it takes a little while.
Okay.
And then to Steve's point, you know, we do our annual tour in May. Last year we did a virtual tour. And so we've got a list started of things, but if you have other, and this is more physical viewing of something, if you've got things you'd like to see or learn more about, just send me those notes too, and we'll put that in our virtual tour. And by the way, for Lisa and Greg, it just was a virtual tour for the first time last year. Otherwise, we literally get into a bus and go around the city and look at what's happening. So
Hopefully we can get back to the bus soon. So
yes.
Great.
Anybody else with anything else? Future agendas, anything else?
Yeah, I've got something, Mark.
Yeah.
Just kind of a point of procedure. I realized during the discussion of the Phase 7 talk today that, as the town rep, I only vote on matters of electric and sewer because those two utilities serve the town as well as the city. But for kind of, I'd call it multidisciplinary projects where you're putting in streets, sanitary sewer, wastewater, that type of thing, where electric and sewer are components of a larger project. Do I vote on those or not?
My answer is yes, John.
Okay.
We would kind of focus it to electric, water, or electric and sewer, but generally we would ask you to vote.
Okay. Good. I think that's the right thing. Thanks.
Yep.
Would agree with that. That's it for me.
All right. Anybody with anything else? All right. Since I've been told I have the power to do this, I'm just going to declare the meeting adjourned and thank everybody. Until
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.